Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. It was election season again, and the media was frothing with scandal. Every candidate seemed to be drowning in skeletons from their pasta drugs, affairs, corruption, you name it. Except for Senator Marcus Avery. Jack Rivers sat in his cluttered office, staring at his screen, and couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Avery's name had been rising in the polls, but where was the dirt? It wasn't just clean, it was spotless. Jack's fingers tapped the keyboard, pulling up every piece of information he could find on the man. Wealthy family, attended Ivy League schools, spotless career in politics. It didn't sit right. No one came out of this game unscathed, especially not in today's world where every text, tweet, and email was fair game. Jack knew better than to trust a facade that clean. Just as he was about to close the window, a new email pinged in his inbox. No subject, no name. Curious, Jack opened it. The email was brief, containing a single link followed by the message, "Follow the rabbit." He'd been a journalist long enough to know a breadcrumb when he saw one. Something told him to follow this trail, no matter where it led. Clicking the link led him to a dead web page with nothing but a string of code blinking in the corner. It was nonsense to Jack, but he knew someone who could make sense of it. "Are you out of your mind, Jack?" Sarah Caldwell's voice crackled over the phone. "Do you have any idea what you're messing with?" He grinned, imagining her exasperation on the other end of the line. Sarah had once been the most notorious hacker on the East Coast before she turned her talents to more legal, if not entirely honest, work in cybersecurity. They crossed paths more times than he could count. "I wouldn't have called if I wasn't serious, Sarah," he replied. "I've got a feeling this is big." "Real big." "Someone's erasing the past." He heard her sigh deeply. "Send me the link." 5 minutes later, her voice returned. "Jesus, this isn't just erasing the past. Whoever did this rewrote history. It's not just Marcus Avery's skeleton, so there's no evidence he was ever involved in anything shady." And Jack, a broken bar. "This looks like it's tied to something deeper, something powerful." A surge of adrenaline hit Jack. "How deep?" "Deep enough that even I have limits. The kind that makes people disappear." The following day, Jack received another anonymous email. This one wasn't just a link. It was a warning. "Stop digging." Attached was a grainy photo of his apartment, taken from across the street. Jack's blood ran cold. He'd dealt with threats before, but this felt different. It was too close, too personal. He considered quitting for a split second. But that's not who Jack Rivers was. He didn't back down, and this host confirmed what he suspected. He was onto something huge. This wasn't just about an election. Someone was playing God with the entire system. Jack met Sarah that evening at a dingy bar on the edge of town. It wasn't their usual spot, but discretion was important now. Sarah had pulled the strings on every backdoor she could find in the election servers and databases. "I think I've found something," she whispered as they sat at a corner booth. Her eyes darted around the room nervously. "A network, Jack. Not just a group, an entire network of people. They're rewriting more than just Avery's record. There are signs of manipulation in other campaigns too. It's not just this election. They've been doing it for years." Jack leaned in closer. "Who?" "They call themselves the Dark Network. And from what I can tell, they control everything. Election results, news cycles, even social media algorithms. If they want someone in power, it happens." His mind reeled. "What do we do?" Sarah bit her lip. "I don't know. They've covered their tracks well. We need something solid if we're going to blow the lid off this thing. And we need to be careful. They're already watching you." Jack's heart raced as he walked back to his apartment later that night, the city's neon lights flashing around him. The weight of the truth sat heavy on his shoulders. If the dark network was as powerful as Sarah suspected, they weren't just dealing with a political scandal. They were going up against a shadow government. Over the next few days, Jack and Sarah worked in secret, diving deeper into the digital web that connected omni-data, a massive data company with ties to both the private sector and government contracts, to the election tampering. Sarah hacked into encrypted files, uncovering layers of digital manipulation that showed the dark network's influence in everything from local races to presidential elections. Every step forward brought new dangers. Sarah's apartment was broken into, her computer wiped clean. Jack's editor received a tip-off, and Jack was pulled from the election coverage, told to focus on more traditional stories. The pressure was mounting, but Jack knew they couldn't stop now. He reached out to an old source, someone deep within the government's cyber operations. The man, codenamed Falcon, agreed to meet in an underground parking garage late at night. "You're playing with fire, Rivers," Falcon said, his voice low and urgent. "This dark network, it's bigger than you think. They've been at this for decades, and every time someone tries to expose them, they vanish. People die, careers are destroyed, and the story never sees the light of day." Jack frowned. "What do they want?" "Control," Falcon replied. "Control of everything. They don't care about political parties or ideologies. They want the power to shape the world as they see fit." "And what happens if we try to stop them?" "You won't. At best, you'll get enough evidence to stir up some noise, but they'll bury it before anyone can make a move." Jack left the meeting feeling both more determined and more afraid than ever. He wasn't just chasing a lead anymore. He was in the middle of a war, and the dark network had been playing this game far longer than he had. But there was no turning back now. He had to see it through. Back at his apartment, Jack and Sarah devised a plan. They'd infiltrate Omnidata's headquarters, the hub of the dark network's operations. If they could access the servers there, they'd find the hard evidence they needed to bring the whole system down. It was a long shot, and they both knew it. Omnidata was guarded by a private security force called Blackwave, and their digital defenses were state-of-the-art. But Sarah was the best hacker Jack knew, and if anyone could get in, it was her. "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked as they geared up for the break-in. Sarah nodded, her face set in determination. "I've come this far. I'm not backing out now." The night of the infiltration, Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they approached Omnidata's towering glass building. The streets were eerily quiet, and the faint hum of the city's neon lights buzzed in the background. Sarah had already disabled the building's exterior security systems, but inside was another story. They slipped through the front entrance, careful to avoid the cameras. Jack followed Sarah as she led him to a hidden stairwell that would take them to the server room. Every creak of the floor felt like a gunshot in the silence, every shadow a potential threat. Finally, they reached the server room. Sarah quickly got to work, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she bypassed layers of encryption. Jack stood watch, scanning the room for any sign of Blackwave security. "Got it," Sarah whispered, pulling up files that detailed the dark network's operations. "This is it, Jack. Everything we need." But just as she started downloading the data, alarms blared throughout the building. The alarm's piercing wail shot through the silence, echoing off the sterile, white walls of the server room. Jack's heart leapt into his throat as he spun to face the door, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. He felt the panic rise in his chest, but there was no time for that now. Sarah was still typing furiously, fingers blurring over the keys. "I just need a few more seconds," she muttered, her voice strained. "We don't have a few more seconds," Jack snapped, looking frantically around the room. His eyes landed on a narrow ventilation shaft just above the floor. It wasn't big, but it might be their only chance. "Sarah, we need to go in now." Sarah cursed under her breath as she yanked a flash drive from the computer. "Got it," she hissed, stuffing the drive into her pocket just as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Jack grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the vent. They dropped to the floor, squeezing themselves into the tight space as the door to the server room slammed open. Black boots stormed in, the Blackwave enforcers spreading out in a practice formation. Jack held his breath, feeling the tension coil tight in his chest. He could see Sarah's eyes wide in the dim light, her breathing shallow as she pressed herself against the cold metal of the vent. Seconds stretched into eternity as the enforcers swept the room, their heavy boots clanging against the tile floors. One of them stopped just inches from the vent. Jack's pulse raced, blood pounding in his ears. He could see the man's shadow looming over them, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. "Clear," the enforcer finally said. His voice was muffled, but Jack could make out the words. They must have tripped the system. Jack waited until the footsteps retreated before slowly exhaling. He nudged Sarah, who gave a tight nod in response. They had to move. Crawling silently through the narrow vent, they made their way toward the exit, the oppressive weight of the situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. The moment they merged into the night air, Jack sucked in a breath. The city lights glimmered in the distance, but the building behind them felt like a ticking time bomb. They didn't stop running until they were blocks away, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade. Jack slumped against a brick wall, breathing hard. "What the hell was that?" he gasped. Sarah pulled at the flash drive, holding it up triumphantly. "That," she said, "was us getting what we came for." Jack blinked, his mind spinning as he stared at the tiny device in her hand. They had done it. They had the proof. But the cost of what they had just set in motion was starting to weigh on him. There was no turning back now. No hiding from what came next. "We need to release this," Jack said, his voice firm. "Before they can stop us." Sarah nodded, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "We'll need to be smart about it," she said. "If we just throw this out there, they'll drown it in disinformation. We have to hit them where it hurts." Jack understood what she meant. The dark network controlled more than just the election. They had their hands in everything: the media, corporations, even government agencies. If Jack and Sarah weren't careful, this story would be buried before it ever saw the light of day. Over the next few hours, they worked tirelessly, contacting underground networks of whistleblowers, alternative media outlets, and trusted journalists who operated beyond the reach of mainstream influence. Slowly, they pieced together a plan. It was risky, no, it was insane, but it was the only shot they had. As the hours wore on, Jack felt the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones. His apartment, his career, his life, everything had been upended by this investigation. And now, they were about to take a step that would make them the target of one of the most powerful organizations in the world. "Jack," Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was staring at her screen, the glow reflecting off her glasses. "It's time." Jack stood up, his hands shaking as he typed out the final message. His breath caught in his throat as he hit send, knowing that everything was about to change. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the notifications started coming in at hundreds, thousands of them. The story was spreading like wildfire across the internet. Social media platforms were lighting up with the revelations about the dark network, Omnidata, and their manipulation of the election. People were outraged, protests were forming. The news outlets couldn't ignore it. But Jack knew the fight wasn't over. The dark network wasn't going to let this go without a fight. 2 days later, the fallout was in full swing. Marcus Avery's campaign had all but collapsed under the weight of scandal. Investigations were being launched. Omnidata was scrambling to contain the damage. But it was too late. The public knew the truth now, and there was no going back. Jack watched the chaos unfold from the safety of a nondescript motel on the edge of town. He hadn't left the room since the story broke, knowing full well that the dark network wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. Sarah had already gone into hiding, her digital footprint completely erased. Jack didn't know if he'd see her again. The world outside was changing, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For all the attention the story had garnered, for all the public outrage and the media frenzy, he knew the dark network wasn't finished. They were too powerful to be taken down by one expose. 8 copyright. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text message, from an unknown number. "You can't run forever." Jack's blood ran cold. He stood up, pacing the room, his mind racing. They had gotten too close. Even with the story out, even with the public watching, they were still in danger. The dark network would find a way to silence him. It was only a matter of time. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Jack froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached for the gun he had stashed in the nightstand, the cold metal heavy in his hand. Another knock, louder this time. He crept to the door, peering through the peephole. His breath caught in his throat. It was Sarah. He opened the door cautiously, letting her in. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah didn't answer right away. She sank into the chair by the window, staring out at the empty parking lot. "I had to see you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something's happening, Jack." "It's bigger than we thought." Jack frowned, sitting across from her. "What do you mean?" Sarah turned to face him, her eyes dark and haunted. "The dark network. They've been planning this for years. This isn't just about elections. It's about control. And they're not done." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying?" "They've already moved on," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "They're setting up for the next phase. And it's not just the government, Jack. They're going global. Financial systems, corporate power, even military contracts. They've infiltrated everything." Jack's stomach twisted. He had thought they were close to ending this, but it was only the beginning. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice barely steady. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "We fight back," she said. "We expose everything. We hit them harder than we ever have." Jack swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. They would be running for the rest of their lives. But there was no other choice. He nodded, standing up and grabbing his bag. "Let's finish this." Sarah stood beside him, her hand gripping the flash drive tightly. Together, they walked out of the motel, into the uncertain night, knowing that the battle ahead would be the hardest one yet.